Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
Michael Corinthos had been carrying a weight on his shoulders for days, a truth so explosive that he struggled to even put it into words. The truth burned inside him, pushing against his conscience with every waking moment, until finally, the pressure became too much to contain. He knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. In the grand tradition of Port Charles' secrets unraveling in the most shocking fashion, Michael finally came forward with a revelation that threatened to turn lives upside down. With a steady but pained voice, he exposed Willow as the one responsible for shooting Drew, and once the words left his lips, there was no taking them back. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had once been whispered suspicions or uneasy glances now exploded into a full-blown scandal, and before long, the entire canvas of the show was buzzing with disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. It was a revelation that nobody had seen coming, and yet once it was out in the open, everything began to fall apart. For Michael, the decision to expose Willow was not one he made lightly. He loved her deeply, and their bond had been tested through the toughest of circumstances, including her battle with leukemia and the desperate search for a bone marrow transplant. He had stood by her side through illness, through fear, through the kind of personal struggles that would have broken many couples. But love in Port Charles is rarely simple, and secrets have a way of poisoning even the strongest bonds. The fact that Willow could have been the one to pull the trigger on Drew Kane, a man Michael trusted as both family and ally, ate at him until he could no longer rationalize keeping it hidden. The image of Drew bleeding, fighting for his life, and the chaos that followed haunted him. When the pieces began to line up and Michael realized where the trail of evidence pointed, he knew what he had to do. His heart told him one thing, but his conscience demanded another, and ultimately, the truth won. The aftermath of Michael's revelation was immediate and fiery. Gasps filled the room, shock-widened eyes, and accusations began to fly. How could Willow, the gentle and kind-hearted woman everyone knew, possibly be responsible for something so violent? Those who knew her best refused to believe it at first, clinging to the idea that there must be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Others, however, began to replay recent events in their minds, connecting dots that suddenly seemed much clearer. The balance of loyalty in Port Charles began to wobble dangerously, and as always, alliances shifted in an instant. Michael stood firm, his voice heavy with both sorrow and determination, but the damage to his relationship with Willow was already apparent. Willow herself was stunned, frozen in place as the accusation fell on her like a hammer. Her first instinct was denial. How could Michael, of all people, stand before everyone and accuse her of something so horrific? She wanted to shout, to push back, to claim her innocence, but the weight of evidence that Michael brought forward left her shaken. The look in his eyes told her that this wasn't some reckless attempt to hurt her, it was the result of deep anguish and reluctant certainty. That cut her deeper than anything else. The man she loved, the father of her children, truly believed she was guilty. And once the first seed of doubt was planted in the minds of others, it quickly spread like wildfire. The whispers spread beyond the walls of that confrontation, and before long, the revelation was all over town. From the hospital corridors to the metro court, from Sonny Corinthos' inner circle to the gossip exchanged over coffee at Kelly's, everyone in Port Charles was talking about Willow being unmasked as Drew's shooter. ABC General Hospital spoilers began to tease the ripple effects, promising that the fallout would be nothing short of catastrophic. With every passing hour, more people chose sides, some defending Willow's character to the end, while others began to wonder if they had been blind to her darker impulses. Carly Spencer was one of the first to react strongly, her protective instincts kicking in immediately. Drew had been her anchor, her partner in recent months, and the idea that Willow, someone Carly had grown close to and even fought for during her health battles, could be responsible for nearly destroying him was almost unthinkable. She demanded answers, pushing Willow to explain herself, her voice trembling with both anger and heartbreak. At the same time, Carly's sharp mind couldn't help but analyze the timing, the motives, and the possible setups. Was Willow truly guilty, or was someone manipulating the situation to make it look that way? Carly's instincts told her there might be more layers to the story, but Michael's certainty left her conflicted. Meanwhile, Drew himself struggled to process the revelation. Still recovering, still piecing together fragments of what had happened during the shooting, he was torn between gratitude for being alive and fury at the betrayal. Willow had been someone he trusted, someone who had stood beside Michael as family. The notion that she could turn on him so violently shook him to his core. His mind raced with questions. Why would she do it? What was the motive? And if Michael believed it enough to expose her, could Drew afford to dismiss the accusation? His fury simmered, but underneath it was a profound sadness, the realization that trust within the Corinthos family and its extended circle had been shattered in ways that might never be repaired. The domino effect was swift. Sonny Corinthos, always watching from the shadows when it came to his children's struggles, found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, his loyalty to Michael was ironclad, and if his son believed in Willow's guilt, that carried weight. On the other hand, Sonny had seen firsthand how manipulation, false evidence, and carefully planted lies could ruin lives. His instincts as a mob boss told him not to take anything at face value, but his instincts as a father made him want to protect Michael at all costs. This internal battle set the stage for Sonny to play a key role in unraveling whether Willow was truly guilty or whether someone else was pulling the strings. Everywhere Willow turned, she saw judgment in people's eyes, and it broke her spirit. She thought of her children, of the family she had fought so hard to protect, and the idea that they might grow up thinking their mother was a shooter filled her with despair. She tried to reach Michael, to break through the wall that now separated them, but he was torn apart himself, his love for her colliding with the conviction that the truth had to come first. Their once solid bond now hung by a fragile thread, and the future of their marriage was suddenly very much in question. The more the revelation spread through Port Charles, the more tangled the emotions became. Michael's words echoed in every conversation, reverberating through families, friendships, and alliances. The city seemed to split in two, those who believed Willow could never commit such an act, and those who felt that her guilt explained so many unanswered questions. It wasn't just gossip, it became a point of conflict in nearly every household. At the Quartermain mansion, tensions rose as Brooklyn, Ned, and Olivia debated what to believe, their voices raised late into the night. For Brooklyn, loyalty to Willow came naturally, especially after everything Willow endured with her health. She argued passionately that Willow had been targeted, framed, or misunderstood. Olivia, though sympathetic, couldn't ignore the seriousness of Michael's certainty. The Quartermains had always lived under the weight of scandal, and this felt like another devastating chapter in their already complicated family history. At the hospital, whispers traveled faster than the morning shift change. Nurses in the hallways exchanged nervous glances, doctors tried to keep their focus, but everyone was talking about the shocking turn of events. Willow, who had once been admired as both a nurse and a survivor, suddenly found herself under a cloud of suspicion. Her colleagues didn't know how to act around her, some offered quiet reassurances, while others avoided eye contact altogether. The scrutiny was suffocating. Even her patients, though largely unaware of the full story, could sense that something was off. Willow had once been a source of strength and calm within those walls, but now she walked the corridors like a shadow, her confidence stripped away. For Willow, the hardest part was not just being accused, but realizing how quickly trust could evaporate. The memory of Michael standing up, his voice steady as he spoke the words that cast her as Drew's shooter, replayed in her mind endlessly. She wanted to believe there was still a chance to reach him, to make him see that he had been misled, but every attempt she made seemed to push him further away. Michael himself was spiraling, caught between two worlds, one where he was a husband and father protecting his family, and one where he was a man of integrity who refused to bury the truth. The tension between those two identities wore him down, leaving him sleepless, haunted, and restless. He loved Willow, but his loyalty to Drew and his sense of morality kept tearing him in another direction. Carly, never one to sit idly by, began her own investigation. She knew Michael was rarely wrong when he trusted his instincts, but something about the situation gnawed at her. Drew's shooting had been sudden, chaotic, and shrouded in confusion. Carly retraced events, visiting the scene, asking quiet questions, trying to piece together moments that had been overlooked. Her determination to get answers wasn't just about protecting Drew, it was also about protecting Michael. She understood her son well enough to know that exposing Willow had cost him deeply, and if there was even the smallest chance that Willow had been set up, Carly was determined to prove it. Meanwhile, Drew's anger simmered. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, but he also couldn't shake the haze of uncertainty around the shooting. Memory is often unreliable in trauma, and Drew's recollections were fragmented at best. The sound of the gunshot, the rush of pain, the faces around him all blurred into chaos. When he tried to recall details, it felt like chasing smoke. Still, the emotional toll was real. Knowing Michael, his own nephew, had turned against Willow gave Drew pause. He respected Michael too much to dismiss his conviction outright. Yet, at the same time, Drew's own instincts about Willow didn't align with the image of her as a cold-blooded shooter. That tension left him unsettled, and his recovery grew more complicated as anger and confusion warred inside him. Sonny, ever the strategist, began pulling strings quietly. He reached out to his network, calling in favors, digging for information that might not be available to the police or hospital staff. To Sonny, truth was always a layered thing, and he wasn't about to let his family be torn apart without understanding who stood to gain from the chaos. The idea that someone could be framing Willow wasn't far-fetched in his world. Sonny knew enemies rarely attacked head-on, they dismantled lives by planting seeds of doubt, turning loved ones against each other, and letting paranoia do the rest. He suspected there was more here than met the eye, and though he wasn't ready to declare Willow innocent, he wasn't about to close the book on her either. Elsewhere, Nina Reeves watched the fallout with a conflicted heart. Her relationship with Willow had always been complicated, strained by resentment and misunderstandings, only to thaw in moments of genuine connection. The accusation against Willow stirred conflicting emotions in Nina. On one hand, she worried about her daughter's reputation being destroyed beyond repair. On the other, a small, guilty part of her felt relief that for once, the spotlight of scandal wasn't shining on her. But motherly instincts soon overwhelmed her, and she found herself rushing to Willow's side, desperate to offer support even if Willow wasn't ready to accept it. The tension between them made every word heavy, but Nina's determination to protect her daughter only grew stronger in the storm. As the town buzzed with speculation, law enforcement became more involved. Dante Falconeri, torn between his duty as a cop and his loyalty as family, began digging into the case with meticulous care. He wanted the truth above all, even if it meant uncovering something that would hurt those he loved. Dante knew Michael wouldn't make the accusation lightly, but he also knew the dangers of following emotions rather than facts. He reviewed evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and began to notice small inconsistencies in the timeline that didn't quite match up with Willow being the shooter. The deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that the story wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. Yet the pressure mounted on him daily, as colleagues, friends, and family demanded answers. Through it all, Willow found herself caught in a storm of guilt and helplessness. Even though she knew in her heart she hadn't shot Drew, the mere accusation began to eat away at her self-confidence. Every look of suspicion, every whispered conversation in the corner of a room, every strained silence from those she loved most, became a punishment she couldn't escape. Her love for Michael was tested like never before, as she wrestled with the possibility that their marriage might not survive. Worse yet, she worried what her children would grow up believing. In Port Charles, reputations stick, and she feared that no matter what the truth revealed, the stain of this accusation would follow her forever. The storm was only beginning. And while Michael's revelation had set the town on fire, the embers of truth remained buried, waiting to be uncovered. The question now wasn't just whether Willow had pulled the trigger, it was who stood to benefit most from her downfall. The days after Michael's revelation seemed to stretch endlessly, each one bringing fresh waves of conflict and suspicion. Port Charles had always been a town where secrets traveled fast, but this secret burned hotter than most. Every coffee shop conversation, every hushed exchange in the hospital, and every tense dinner table debate circled back to one thing: Michael had exposed Willow, and the town would never be the same. The story had taken on a life of its own, warping facts into gossip and gossip into accusations. By the time the rumor mill was done with it, Willow was painted as everything from a desperate woman pushed to her limits to a calculating liar who had fooled everyone for years. The truth had been swallowed up in the chaos, and Willow herself felt powerless to correct it. Michael, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. Though he had spoken the truth as he saw it, the burden of being the one to expose Willow left him in a lonely position. Friends who once had his back now looked at him with hesitation, worried that his decision had been hasty. Some accused him of betraying his wife and the mother of his children. Others praised him for his courage, saying he had done what few could, placing justice above love. Michael bore their words stoically, but inside, the guilt gnawed at him. He replayed every moment with Willow, searching for clues he might have missed, anything that would confirm he was right. Yet with every passing day, the look of heartbreak in her eyes haunted him more than the memory of Drew's bloodied body. For Willow, life became unbearable in subtle, suffocating ways. She would walk into Kelly's and feel conversations stop abruptly. At the hospital, whispers followed her as she walked the halls. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now offered polite nods and quick exits. The world had turned cold, and she couldn't help but feel as though she were standing on trial in every interaction. Her innocence meant little when the accusation had come from the man who knew her best. If Michael believed she had done it, how could she convince the rest of the town otherwise? The loneliness crept in slowly, but it consumed her. She started to avoid going out altogether, retreating into the quiet of her home, where the silence was almost louder than the judgment outside. Dante pressed forward in his investigation, his instincts telling him that the truth was buried beneath layers of manipulation. He pored over reports, reconstructed timelines, and tracked down every witness, no matter how small their role. It was painstaking work, but Dante knew the stakes were high. If Willow was innocent, then the real shooter was still out there, and if she was guilty, then Michael's family was about to be ripped apart in ways they couldn't imagine. But the inconsistencies kept piling up. A neighbor recalled seeing someone lurking near the property on the night of the shooting. A witness at the hospital remembered overhearing a conversation that suggested Drew had been targeted for reasons unrelated to Willow entirely. The pieces didn't fit neatly together, and Dante's gut told him that Willow was being framed. Still, he knew that speculation wasn't enough, he needed proof. Nina refused to let her daughter suffer alone. She pushed past the frostiness in their relationship, showing up at Willow's door with food, comfort, and a determination that bordered on obsession. Willow resisted at first, reluctant to let Nina in, but grief has a way of softening walls. Late one night, the two women sat together in silence, and for the first time, Willow admitted her fear. She didn't know how to prove her innocence. The words broke Nina's heart, and in that moment, her mission became clear. She would find the truth, no matter what it cost her. For Nina, it wasn't just about clearing Willow's name, it was about finally being the mother she had longed to be, standing by her daughter in her darkest hour. Carly's search for answers began to converge with Dante's. Though neither realized it at first, their separate investigations uncovered similar threads. Carly noticed inconsistencies in security footage around the area of the shooting, gaps in time that didn't align with the official record. Dante found a witness who mentioned hearing a vehicle speeding away shortly before Drew was found. Both details hinted at an orchestrated event, not a crime of passion. When Carly and Dante eventually compared notes, the spark of realization was electric. They were chasing the same truth, and together, they might actually find it. Back at the Quartermain mansion, tension reached a boiling point. Brooke Lynn continued to defend Willow fiercely, clashing with Ned, who took a more pragmatic stance. He argued that perception was reality in Port Charles, and whether Willow was guilty or not, her association with the family now threatened their already fragile reputation. Olivia tried to mediate, but the arguments grew louder, echoing through the halls like ghosts of past scandals. The Quartermains had always been adept at surviving chaos, but this scandal cut too close to home, threatening to fracture them in ways that money and power couldn't fix. Drew's recovery was complicated by his own turmoil. Nightmares plagued him, dreams where the shooter's face blurred between Willow, Michael, and shadowy strangers. He would wake drenched in sweat, unsure of what was real and what was imagined. The hospital staff urged him to focus on healing, but Drew couldn't let go of the mystery. He needed answers, not just for himself but for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of the shooting. The more he thought about it, the less convinced he became of Willow's guilt. And yet, the hurt lingered. How could Michael accuse her unless he was sure? Drew's mind was a battlefield, torn between gratitude for surviving and anger at the unanswered questions. Sonny's patience wore thin. While others argued and speculated, he demanded results from his network. If someone had tried to take down Drew, it could have been a move against his family, and Sonny never tolerated attacks on his blood. His men reported back with fragments of information, an unfamiliar car spotted near the area, whispers of a hired gun who had recently passed through town. None of it pointed directly at Willow, and that only reinforced Sonny's growing suspicion that his daughter-in-law was being used as a pawn. His mind shifted from whether Willow was guilty to who would benefit from making her appear guilty. The list of potential enemies was long, but Sunny was determined to shorten it. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, the bond between Michael and Willow continued to fray. Nights in their home became tense, filled with long silences, broken only by the cries of their children. Michael wanted desperately to comfort her, to believe in her again, but every time he looked at her, the doubt crept in. Willow, on the other hand, felt betrayed beyond repair. Love wasn't supposed to look like this, love wasn't supposed to put her on trial. The chasm between them grew wider with every passing day, leaving both of them to wonder if their marriage could survive, even if the truth finally cleared her name. The storm that had been brewing around Willow reached new heights as days stretched into weeks. What started as Michael's gut-wrenching revelation had spiraled into a full-blown crisis that consumed every corner of Port Charles. Families fought, friendships fractured, and whispers turned into open accusations. What made everything worse was the uncertainty. No one had definitive proof. Instead, the town clung to suspicion, hearsay, and emotion, each side digging in deeper with every passing day. For some, Michael's word was enough to seal Willow's fate. For others, the lack of clear evidence was reason enough to believe she was being framed. In the middle of it all, Willow lived with the unbearable reality of being branded guilty without ever having a chance to defend herself. Nina's determination to clear her daughter's name intensified, and she began working quietly with Dante. Though their relationship had been rocky at best, they both shared the same goal, proving Willow innocent. Nina pulled strings wherever she could, calling in favors from business contacts, slipping into conversations at the Metro Court to pick up on bits of gossip that others might dismiss. Dante, meanwhile, doubled down on the official investigation, carefully balancing his role as a detective with his loyalty to family. The closer they looked, the clearer it became that someone had gone to great lengths to make Willow appear guilty. There were traces of manipulation in the evidence, small details that didn't add up unless someone had planted them. Michael, however, wasn't privy to all of this. He continued to shoulder the weight of his decision, haunted by the look in Willow's eyes the moment he had exposed her. He replayed it constantly, the disbelief, the hurt, the shattering of trust between them. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that telling the truth was the only path forward. But his conviction began to crack. Doubt crept in late at night when the house was quiet, whispering questions he couldn't ignore. What if he had been wrong? What if he had let circumstantial evidence cloud his judgment? And most terrifying of all, what if he had destroyed his marriage and his family for nothing? Willow herself had been pushed to the brink. Her gentle spirit had always been her greatest strength, but under the weight of constant judgment, she felt herself unraveling. Nights were sleepless, filled with silent tears as she stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She thought of her children, of the life she had fought so hard to build, and it felt like it was slipping away from her one piece at a time. She still loved Michael with every fiber of her being, but the betrayal of his accusation had left scars she wasn't sure would ever heal. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to prove her innocence, but without evidence, her voice felt like a whisper in a storm. Drew's recovery reached a turning point when fragments of memory began to return. They weren't clear, and they came in flashes that felt more like dreams than reality, but there was one thing he knew for certain: the shooter hadn't felt like Willow. The height, the build, the way they moved, it didn't match her. He couldn't explain it fully, but his instincts told him the truth his mind couldn't yet articulate. Drew began to share his doubts quietly, first with Carly, then with Sunny. His words carried weight, and for the first time since Michael's revelation, a new narrative began to take shape. Maybe Willow hadn't been the shooter at all. Carly seized on Drew's uncertainty, determined to prove it once and for all. She and Dante began piecing together the timeline in greater detail, and their efforts soon uncovered a breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a nearby street showed a shadowy figure fleeing the scene around the time of the shooting. The footage was grainy, but the figure's build and movements didn't match Willow. Though it wasn't conclusive enough to exonerate her outright, it raised serious questions about the validity of Michael's claim. Carly confronted Michael with the footage, her voice sharp with urgency, demanding he take another look at the situation. Michael resisted at first, clinging to his certainty, but the seed of doubt planted itself deeper. Sunny's men also came through with a crucial lead, a report of a known mercenary passing through Port Charles around the time of Drew's shooting. The mercenary's reputation preceded him, someone who took contracts, no questions asked, and who had ties to enemies of the Corinthos family. Sunny immediately saw the bigger picture. If Drew had been targeted, it wasn't about personal vendettas between loved ones. It was a calculated move meant to destabilize his family and sow chaos. Willow being accused was collateral damage, or perhaps even part of the plan. Sunny shared his suspicions with Michael, telling him bluntly that he may have played right into the hands of someone trying to destroy them all. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. He had stood so firmly in his belief, so convinced that he was doing the right thing, but the cracks were now undeniable. If he had been manipulated into accusing his wife, then he had not only failed to protect Drew, he had also destroyed Willow in the process. The guilt was overwhelming, and for the first time, Michael allowed himself to truly see the pain in Willow's eyes. He realized how deeply he had hurt her, how much trust he had shattered, and how difficult it would be to repair what they had lost. But even as Michael wrestled with his guilt, the danger wasn't over. Whoever had orchestrated Drew's shooting and set Willow up was still out there, watching the chaos unfold. And in Port Charles, enemies never stayed in the shadows for long. The stage was being set for another confrontation, one that would finally expose the truth, but at what cost? For Willow, the small flickers of hope that came with new evidence were both a relief and a torment. Relief, because maybe, just maybe, her name could be cleared. Torment, because even if the truth came out, the scars of betrayal would remain. She wondered if her marriage to Michael could survive the wreckage, or if the damage had already been done. The love between them was undeniable, but love wasn't always enough to erase the pain of doubt. Port Charles stood on the edge of revelation, its people bracing for answers that could heal old wounds or rip them open even wider. Michael's decision had set everything in motion, but the truth still lay just out of reach. And in the world of General Hospital, truth was never simple, it was always messy, dangerous, and transformative.